A little girl in a tattered school uniform clutches her mother's cleaning rag as she timidly walks through the grand halls of a luxury corporate tower. She stares at the billionaire's son and his rich friends laughing until one of them points at her shoes and mocks, "Did your mum pick those from the trash?" The laughter echoes. Her eyes fill with tears. But what no one knows is that this tiny moment of humiliation will change the billionaire's heart forever and expose a secret that will turn the entire company upside down. The sun had just begun to rise over Harrington City, painting the skyline in shades of gold and amber. The glass towers glistened like jewels, but deep beneath their shine, a very different life stirred to begin another long day. Inside one of those towers, Harrington Enterprises, a billion-dollar technology empire, Maria Santos, a single mother in her early 30s, quietly clocked in. Her uniform was faded, her shoes were worn, and her hands already bore the marks of years of labor. Yet her spirit carried a quiet strength that refused to break. Every morning, Maria whispered a small prayer before she began cleaning the marble floors of the building. "Lord, give me strength today. Let my daughter never feel the pain I've known." Her daughter Lila was the reason Maria woke up before dawn every day. At just 8 years old, Lila was full of dreams far bigger than their small rented room in the city's old quarter. She had soft curls that fell across her eyes, and when she smiled, she could light up even the gloomiest room. Lila would often sit on a bench near the reception lobby of Harrington Enterprises, waiting for her mother to finish work before heading to school. She'd spend that time doing her homework, reading books, or sketching with the little box of crayons Maria had saved for months to buy. Despite her humble circumstances, Lila carried herself with quiet grace. She believed in kindness, in fairness, and in people's ability to be good, lessons her mother had taught her since she was little. But not everyone saw her that way. In the same building, on the top floor, Alexander Harrington, one of the city's most powerful billionaires, held his empire together with precision and control. His name commanded respect and fear alike. He was known for his sharp business instincts, his taste for perfection, and his cold, almost mechanical demeanor. Alexander had built everything from the ground up, or so he liked to tell himself. But in truth, he had built his fortune on the backs of thousands of hardworking people like Maria, whose names he would never know. His son, Ethan Harrington, was 12 years old, charming on the outside, but arrogant beyond measure. With his expensive clothes, the latest gadgets, and the invisible armor of privilege, Ethan had never known what struggle felt like. At school, everyone admired him for his last name. He was the center of attention, the boy who got everything he wanted. But beneath his confident smile lay a hollow understanding of life, one shaped entirely by luxury. He had never met anyone like Lila. It was on a Monday morning that their worlds first truly crossed. Maria had arrived early, as usual, to clean the executive floor after an overnight event. She carried her bucket, mop, and a thermos of lukewarm coffee. Lila followed quietly behind, her little backpack bouncing as she walked. "Sit here, sweetheart," Maria said softly, setting up a chair near the lobby's corner. "I'll be done in a few hours. Just read or draw, okay?" Lila nodded and smiled. "I'll be good, Mama." Maria kissed her forehead, smoothing back her curls before heading upstairs. The girl opened her sketchbook and began drawing what she saw: the big marble staircase, the shiny glass doors, the tall men in suits walking by. To her, it was all a world of wonder, a world she believed she might one day belong to. That morning, however, Ethan and a few of his friends had been dropped off early. They were waiting for their father's meeting to end before heading to their private school. Bored, they wandered around the lobby, joking and tossing coins at the decorative fountain. It didn't take long for Ethan to notice Lila. She was sitting quietly, wearing an oversized school uniform that had been patched several times. Her shoes were scuffed, her backpack old. She was out of place among the gleaming walls and designer suits, and that was all the excuse Ethan needed to make her his target. He nudged his friend, smirking. "Hey, look," he whispered. "The janitor brought her kid again," his friend snickered. "She looks like she lives in a trash can." Ethan grinned cruelly. "Let's ask her where she shops. Maybe the garbage bin behind the mall." They walked over, their footsteps echoing across the marble floor. Lila looked up, startled. She smiled shyly, thinking they might be friendly. "Hi," she said softly. Ethan's grin widened. "Hi, wow, you talk?" "I thought janitor's kids were supposed to stay quiet." Lila blinked, unsure what to say. "My mom's working upstairs. I'm just waiting for her." "Oh, I know," Ethan replied. "She's the one who scrubs the floors, right? My dad says people like her should be grateful just to be inside this building." His friends laughed. One of them grabbed Lila's sketchbook and flipped through it. "What's this? You drawing our company? Ha! You think you'll ever work here?" I just like drawing," she said, trying to take it back. But Ethan wasn't done. He pointed at her shoes, old sneakers with frayed laces. "Did your mom pick those from the trash? They look like they belong in a museum for poor people." The boys burst out laughing. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She hugged her bag to her chest, wishing her mother were there. "Please, don't," she whispered. But the laughter only grew louder, echoing through the vast lobby like a cruel symphony. That was when the elevator doors opened and Maria stepped out, holding her cleaning cart. She froze. Her heart sank at the sight of her daughter crying, surrounded by mocking laughter. Maria rushed forward, her voice trembling. "Lila, what happened?" The boys stepped back, startled. Ethan stammered, "We were just joking." But Maria's eyes, fierce with a mother's fury, silenced him. "Joking? You think it is funny to make a little girl cry? Shame on you!" Her accent thickened with emotion, her hands shaking as she pulled her daughter close. Ethan, embarrassed and defensive, muttered, "She shouldn't even be here. This is for employees, not people like you." Maria's jaw tightened. "People like me," she repeated. "I clean this place so that your father and his rich friends can walk on shiny floors. If that does not make me an employee, then what does?" Ethan looked away, ashamed but unwilling to admit it. He shoved his hands in his pockets and walked off with his friends. Maria hugged Lila tightly. "Don't listen to them, my love. They don't know what it means to work. You have more heart than all of them combined." But deep down, Maria felt broken. The image of those boys laughing at her daughter burned into her heart. She wanted to scream, to cry, to tell the world what had just happened, but she knew she couldn't. Not yet. She had no idea that someone in the lobby, a visitor holding a phone, had filmed everything. And by the next morning, that video would ignite a storm that would shake the billionaire's world to its core. The next day dawned grey and heavy, as if the clouds themselves carried the weight of what was about to unfold. Inside Harrington Enterprises, things appeared normal at first. The lobby buzzed with morning energy, executives in tailored suits, assistants balancing coffee trays, and janitors quietly sweeping in the corners. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Maria arrived as usual, her head bowed, her mind replaying yesterday's humiliation like a wound that refused to close. Lila clung to her hand, unusually quiet. Her eyes, once bright and curious, seemed dulled with sadness. "Keep your head up, my love," Maria whispered. "We do not bow to cruelty. We rise above it." Lila nodded faintly, but her little heart still carried the sting of laughter and mockery. Unbeknownst to them, the incident had already begun spreading like wildfire. A visitor who had been waiting in the lobby the day before, a young woman named Sophie Miller, a freelance journalist, had captured the bullying on her phone. At first, she hadn't planned to post it, but later that night, as she replayed the footage of the crying girl, something inside her broke. She uploaded the short clip to social media with the caption, "This is what happens when privilege meets cruelty." A billionaire's son mocks a janitor's daughter inside his father's company. The little girl did nothing but sit quietly. The video was barely 2 minutes long, yet within hours it exploded across platforms. By morning, it had over 2 million views. Comments flooded in. "This is disgusting. Where's the boy's father? That poor child. Someone needs to hold that billionaire accountable." Money can buy anything except decency. The hashtag Justice for Lila began trending worldwide. When Maria entered the lobby that morning, she felt the eyes of strangers on her, whispers following her every step. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with curiosity. Then her phone buzzed with a call from a co-worker. "Maria, have you seen it? You and your daughter. You're all over the internet." She frowned, confused.
What are you saying?
"Someone filmed what happened yesterday. It's everywhere. People are talking about you, about Lila." Maria's hands trembled. She quickly borrowed another worker's phone and opened the video. Her heart stopped. There it was, her daughter's tear-streaked face, the mocking laughter, Ethan's cruel words, and her own desperate attempt to protect her child. The clip ended with her holding Lila close, whispering, "They don't know what it means to work." She could barely breathe. She wanted to hide, to disappear. But she also felt something else rising in her chest, a strange mix of fear and defiance. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was truth, seen by millions. Meanwhile, on the top floor, Alexander Harrington, the billionaire CEO, was in a meeting when his phone began to vibrate relentlessly. His assistant whispered, "Sir, you need to see this." He frowned, annoyed. "Can it wait?" "No, sir, it's about your son." Alexander's expression hardened. "What about him?" Without another word, the assistant handed him a tablet. The video was already playing. The moment he saw Ethan's face mocking a little girl in front of his company logo, Alexander's blood ran cold. He froze as the laughter echoed from the speakers, the same kind of cruel, hollow laughter he'd heard from ruthless men in boardrooms. He turned pale. "Where did this come from?" "It's gone viral, sir," the assistant replied. "Every major outlet is reporting it. The company's name is trending for all the wrong reasons." "Get me my son," he said, his voice like steel. "Now!" Ethan was brought into his father's office by his personal tutor, looking nervous and defiant. Alexander stood by the window, staring out at the skyline he ruled. When he turned, his expression was colder than glass. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Ethan tried to speak, but his father raised a hand. "You humiliated a little girl in my building. You mocked a worker's child, a woman who has cleaned these halls for years. You think your money makes you better than her?" Ethan's lower lip trembled. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to?" Alexander barked. "That video has reached 10 million people, Ethan. Do you know what they see when they look at you? They see a spoiled boy, raised by a father who failed to teach him compassion." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad, I really am." Alexander exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of his desk. His anger began to shift into something heavier, shame. "I built an empire, Ethan, but I failed at building a son who understands humanity." He sank into his chair, the weight of his guilt pressing on him like never before. By noon, every major news channel carried the story. Reporters stood outside Harrington Enterprises, microphones ready, their voices cutting through the chaos. Public outrage continues to grow, following a viral video showing the billionaire's son bullying a janitor's daughter. Employees whispered in the halls. Investors called in panic. Share prices began to dip as sponsors threatened to withdraw their support. Alexander's empire was cracking, not because of a financial scandal, but because of something far more personal, a moral one. Meanwhile, Maria tried to comfort her daughter. They hid in a storage room to escape the attention. Lila clung to her mother's arm. "Mama, did I do something wrong?" Maria's heart broke. "No, my love. You did nothing wrong. The world is just seeing what kind of people some of them are." She wanted to quit, to take Lila and run away from the whispers and flashing cameras. But before she could, a knock came at the door. It was Mr. Alexander Harrington himself, standing there with his assistant, his face lined with regret. "Mrs. Santos," he said quietly, "may I speak with you?" Maria froze. She had never spoken directly to the man whose name adorned the building. She nodded slowly. "I saw what happened," Alexander continued. "I am deeply sorry. No child should have to endure that, especially in my company." What my son did was wrong, and I take full responsibility. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but her tone remained calm. Mr. Harrington, apologies do not erase cruelty. Your son broke my child's heart, he nodded, his voice trembling. I know, and I will make it right. She looked at him skeptically. How? He took a deep breath. By making sure he understands the value of what your daughter already knows, dignity. Starting tomorrow, Ethan will work beside you for as long as it takes for him to learn that lesson. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. You mean he'll clean floors? Yes, Alexander said firmly. And I will be right there to see it happen. It was a decision that would not only transform his son, but change his own soul forever. That night, the city outside glittered with its usual arrogance, towers of glass and steel shining over silent streets. But inside the penthouse of Alexander Harrington, silence carried a different weight. The man who once ruled boardrooms with confidence now sat in his dimly lit study, staring at the reflection of his own empire in the window. It no longer felt like success. It looked like distance, distance between himself and humanity, between himself and his son. On the couch across the room sat Ethan, shoulders slumped, phone buzzing endlessly with messages from friends who now avoided him, from strangers who called him a monster, and from a world that had turned its glare on him for the first time in his life. The boy felt small. Alexander finally broke the silence. Ethan, he said softly, not as a CEO, but as a father who had failed. The boy didn't look up. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I know, Alexander replied, but that doesn't make it right. He walked closer, kneeling so that they were eye to eye, something he hadn't done since Ethan was a child. I saw the video. I saw the way you looked at that little girl, the way you laughed. Do you have any idea what it felt like to watch my son become everything I've spent my life pretending I'm not? Ethan's lips trembled. I'm sorry, Dad. Alexander closed his eyes. Pain etched deep in his voice. Sorry isn't enough, son. It never is. You know what the worst part is? That girl, she didn't even hate you. She was scared, but she didn't fight back. Because somewhere in her little heart, she still believed the world could be kind. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and said the words that would mark the beginning of their transformation. Tomorrow, you're going to work beside the janitor and her daughter. You will scrub the floors you've walked on without seeing, and you will learn the value of every drop of sweat you've never had to shed. Ethan's head snapped up. What? You can't be serious. Oh, I am, Alexander said quietly. You'll spend your mornings cleaning, and your afternoons at school, until I believe you've learned something worth keeping. The boy's face flushed with humiliation. People will laugh at me. Then maybe, Alexander replied sharply, you'll understand what that little girl felt when you laughed at her. The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn. For the first time, his uniform wasn't a crisp private school blazer, it was a janitor's outfit, plain and oversized, with maintenance printed on the back. He walked beside his father through the company's service entrance. Employees stared in disbelief. Some whispered, others filmed. But Alexander didn't care. Maria was already there, polishing the marble floors under the soft glow of early light. When she looked up and saw them, she froze. Mr. Harrington? She asked cautiously. Alexander nodded. I meant what I said. Ethan is here to work with you. Maria frowned. Sir, I do not need help. You don't, he admitted. But he does. Ethan lowered his eyes, unable to meet hers. I'm sorry, he mumbled. Maria said nothing. She handed him a mop. Then start by cleaning what you dirtied. He hesitated. The handle felt strange in his hands, rough, foreign, almost symbolic. The boy who had everything now had to earn his way through humility. The first few hours were torture for Ethan. His arms ached. The smell of cleaning detergent clung to his hands. Every time he looked up, he saw people staring, some in pity, others in judgment. Maria gave him no special treatment. Don't just wipe the floor, she said sternly. Look at it. Make it shine. That's how you respect your work. Ethan followed her lead, trying to imitate her movements. His strokes were clumsy at first, but as the minutes passed, he began to understand something strange. the rhythm of labor, the quiet dignity and repetition. At one point, he caught sight of Lila sitting nearby, coloring in her sketchbook again. She looked up and met his eyes, not with hate, not even with resentment, but with quiet curiosity. When their gazes met, Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. Guilt, regret, humanity. He tried to speak, but she simply smiled faintly and went back to drawing. That tiny act of grace broke something open in him. Days passed. Ethan returned every morning, cleaning alongside Maria. Slowly, the boy, who once mocked the janitor's daughter, began to listen to the rhythm of her life. He learned that Maria walked 3 miles every morning to reach the bus stop, that she sometimes skipped lunch to buy her daughter school supplies, that she never complained, not once, about the pain in her back or the insults from people who looked down on her. One afternoon, as they cleaned the lobby together, Ethan finally spoke. "Mrs. Santos, how do you stay so kind, even when people are so mean?" Maria paused, leaning on her mop. Her eyes were gentle but tired. "Because anger changes nothing, Ethan. But kindness changes people. Even the ones who hurt you." He looked down, ashamed. "Like me," she smiled softly. "Maybe, but I think you are already changing." From that day, something in Ethan shifted. He began greeting the other janitors by name. He wiped tables carefully, polished floors with care, and carried Lila's books when she came to wait for her mother. Upstairs, Alexander watched from the mezzanine level every morning. At first, he thought he was teaching his son a lesson, but soon he realized he was the one being taught. He watched Maria working silently, her face glistening with sweat, her movements precise and graceful. He had passed her kind hundreds of times without noticing. Now he saw her, truly saw her, for the first time. In the evenings, he began to reflect. His empire was built on the labor of people like her, and yet he had never thanked them. His wealth, he now understood, was a house built on invisible pillars of sacrifice. That realization pierced deeper than any financial loss could. He called an emergency board meeting. "From today," he announced, "every employee in this company will be treated with the same dignity as any executive. That means equal benefits for janitors, cafeteria staff, drivers, everyone. If we can't respect the people who build our success, then we don't deserve that success." His board members exchanged stunned glances, but none dared oppose him. Something about Alexander's voice that day carried conviction, not the kind forged in profit, but in truth. 1 week later, Alexander invited Maria and Lila to his office. He stood as they entered, his usual arrogance replaced by humility. "Mrs. Santos," he began, "I owe you more than an apology. You've reminded me of something I lost long ago. Perspective." Maria blinked, uncertain. "Sir?" He gestured toward Lila. "Your daughter's courage exposed my son's cruelty, but she also exposed my blindness. For that I thank her." Lila smiled shyly. "I didn't mean to make trouble." Alexander chuckled softly. "You didn't make trouble, young lady. You made change." Then he turned to Maria. "From this day forward, your position here is no longer just janitor. You are now the employee relations supervisor for the maintenance division. And your daughter's education, from now until university, will be fully funded by the Harrington Foundation." Maria's lips parted in disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say. Just promise me this," Alexander said gently. "Never stop reminding people like me that money isn't the measure of a person's worth." Maria smiled through her tears. "I promise, sir." Behind her, Ethan stood quietly. He walked up to Lila, holding a small paper bag. Inside was a new box of crayons. "For you," he said. "I broke your old ones that day. I wanted to make it right." Lila took them with a smile so genuine that it melted the last traces of guilt from his heart. "It's okay," she said softly. "I forgave you a long time ago." That night, Alexander walked through his nearly empty office, looking at the city below. The towers still gleamed, but for the first time, he understood something profound. The value of a man was not measured by the height of his buildings, but by the depth of his compassion. And in that quiet moment, the billionaire, who once thought himself untouchable, whispered words that would define the rest of his life. "Power means nothing if it cannot lift others." The storm that once surrounded the Harrington name began to calm, but the world was still watching. Every camera, every article, every voice online had one question: would this billionaire truly change, or was it all a show? What happened next silenced the skeptics forever. A week later, the lobby of Harrington Enterprises no longer felt the same. Where there was once invisible labor, now there was acknowledgement. Where there had been indifference, now there was gratitude. Alexander Harrington had made sure of that. He had ordered new uniforms for every janitor, driver and cafeteria worker, not as a gesture of pity, but as a symbol of dignity. The company's massive digital billboard that once flashed only corporate ads now displayed a message in bold white letters: "Respect builds empires. Humanity sustains them." Maria stood before that sign one morning, wiping a tear from her cheek. It was more than words. It was recognition. Beside her, Ethan mopped the marble floor, not out of punishment anymore, but from a sense of purpose. He worked quietly, humming under his breath, while employees passing by smiled at him, no longer in mockery, but in admiration. When Maria approached, he straightened up and said, "Mrs. Santos, I think I finally understand what you meant," she smiled. "About kindness?" He nodded. "About earning something. About what it means to be proud of what you do." Maria placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then you've learned more than most adults in this building ever will." A few days later, Alexander held a press conference, not in the grand auditorium filled with polished executives, but right in the main lobby where everything had begun. The cameras rolled. Reporters crowded around, microphones flashing. He stood beside his son, his posture firm but humble. Maria and Lila were also there, not as victims, but as honored guests. Alexander began, his voice steady yet heavy with emotion. "Good morning, everyone. I've spent years being called a successful man, a billionaire, an innovator, a leader. But last week, I learned that success means nothing if it's not shared with dignity." He paused, letting the words sink in. "My son made a terrible mistake. But as painful as that moment was, it forced me to confront a truth I'd ignored for too long, that wealth can blind us to the worth of those who hold us up." He turned slightly toward Maria and Lila. "I want to say to you, Mrs. Santos, and to your daughter, I am sorry. I failed to see the humanity in the people who make this place what it is." "But that ends today," the crowd murmured. Some executives exchanged glances, surprised by the rawness in his tone. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Alexander turned to his son and handed him the microphone. "Ethan," he said, "there's something you need to say yourself." Ethan swallowed hard. The cameras zoomed in on his young, nervous face. I don't have an excuse," he began quietly. "I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I made fun of her for things she couldn't control. And I did it because I thought being rich made me important." He turned to Lila. "I was wrong. You're stronger than me, and I hope one day I can be as kind as you." The lobby went silent. A few people wiped tears. Maria squeezed her daughter's hand, pride shining through her tears. Alexander stepped forward again. "This company will now launch a foundation called the Lila Project, dedicated to providing scholarships for the children of maintenance and service workers. We will fund education, art, and opportunity for those who deserve it most." The room erupted in applause. It wasn't just a corporate announcement. It was redemption. In the weeks that followed, the Harrington Foundation officially began its work. Maria, once invisible, was now one of its most trusted advisors. Her calm wisdom and grounded values shaped its early mission. Lila's name appeared in the newspapers not as a victim, but as a symbol of grace and courage. The world admired her, not because she had been hurt, but because she had forgiven. Meanwhile, Alexander found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He began visiting the company cafeteria instead of dining in his private suite. He spoke to janitors, clerks, and guards, learning their names and stories. He discovered that his empire wasn't made of profits. It was made of people. One afternoon, as he watched Ethan helping Maria's team polish the lobby floor, he turned to his chief of staff and said, "I used to think wealth meant being above others. Now I see that true wealth means standing with them." The chief of staff smiled faintly. "You've changed, sir." Alexander nodded. "No, I finally started seeing." Months passed. The scandal became a memory, not of shame, but of transformation. The video that once exposed cruelty was now used in ethics programs across schools and companies as an example of change and accountability. Ethan continued to volunteer at the foundation, tutoring younger kids from underprivileged families. He and Lila had become unlikely friends, often sitting together in the company cafeteria, laughing, coloring, and talking about school. One afternoon, as Lila packed her crayons, Ethan asked shyly, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She smiled. "A teacher. I want to help other kids learn, even the ones people ignore." He nodded thoughtfully. "I think you already are one," she laughed softly. "And what about you?" He looked down, embarrassed. "I just want to be a good person, like your mom." Maria overheard them from nearby, and her eyes filled with tears. In that moment, she realized that forgiveness truly had the power to rebuild more than reputations. It could rebuild hearts. To commemorate the transformation, Alexander organized a special event, the Day of Dignity, a new company tradition where executives would trade roles with maintenance and service staff for one day each year. The first year, Alexander himself donned the janitor uniform. Cameras flashed, but there was no pretense in his actions. He mopped floors, emptied bins, and said to every worker he met, "Thank you for building this company." When he saw Maria again, she smiled and said, "Now you know our side, sir." He chuckled, "And I'll never forget it." On the same day, Ethan stood beside Lila during a school assembly. He was invited to share his story, not as the boy who bullied, but as the boy who changed. He took a deep breath and said, "Sometimes we don't realize how words can break someone's world. I used to think being rich made me powerful, but real power is kindness. And it was a girl with crayons who taught me that." The audience erupted in applause. Lila smiled shyly, her small hand slipping into his. Their friendship had become a quiet reminder to everyone. Change is possible when humility meets forgiveness. That evening, Alexander walked through his office alone. The city lights shimmered below, and in the reflection of his glass walls, he saw not the image of a billionaire, but of a man finally free from arrogance. He picked up a framed photo from his desk, a picture of Maria, Lila, Ethan, and himself taken at the foundation launch for the first time. He smiled not with pride, but with peace. "In the end," he whispered to himself, "it wasn't the billions I made that mattered. It was the hearts I learned to see." He looked out into the city one last time, his voice soft and certain. A janitor's daughter reminded a billionaire what it means to be human. Years passed. The world moved on. The headlines faded, and new stories filled the screens of millions. But some stories never truly end. They grow quietly, like roots beneath the earth, shaping everything that blooms above it. The story of Maria Santos, her daughter Lila, and billionaire Alexander Harrington became one of those timeless tales, whispered in boardrooms, taught in classrooms, and remembered by those who once believed that kindness had no place in power. 10 years later, Harrington Enterprises was no longer just a corporate giant. It had become a symbol of ethical transformation. Every new employee, from janitor to executive, attended a workshop titled The Human Side of Success. In the first session, they watched a short film, a dramatized reenactment of that fateful day when a child's voice broke through walls of pride and wealth. The company's annual report no longer opened with profit charts, but with community impact stories. Children sponsored, schools built, workers promoted, and lives changed through the Lila Project Foundation. Each year, on the Day of Dignity, hundreds of employees would switch roles for a day. Executives cleaned floors, janitors signed documents, drivers hosted meetings, not for show, but for empathy. It became a festival of humility, laughter, and gratitude. Maria had retired from her janitorial position years earlier, but she still visited during this annual event. Her hair had turned silver, but her eyes still carried that quiet strength. Employees, old and new, greeted her with warmth and respect. She would smile and say, "I just came to see if everyone is still shining those floors of kindness." The Lila Project Foundation had grown beyond anyone's imagination. What started as a single scholarship program had evolved into a global initiative, funding schools, mentorship programs, and art workshops for children from working-class families. Maria served as honorary chairwoman. Lila, now in her 20s, was the foundation's director. Her dream of becoming a teacher had come true in a different form. She now taught the world through compassion-driven education. She often gave speeches at universities and corporate summits. Her message was simple but powerful. Every person you overlook might be the person who changes your life. During one of her speeches, she showed a photograph of her mother in her janitor's uniform, standing beside Alexander Harrington, both smiling. The audience always fell silent, some wiping away tears. Realizing that true dignity knows no social class, Ethan Harrington had grown into a thoughtful young man, far different from the boy who once mocked others. He had turned down a seat on the company board, choosing instead to work directly within the foundation's community projects. He traveled from city to city, visiting schools and youth shelters, mentoring children who had faced bullying or discrimination. In one heartfelt interview, he said, "Once I thought I was powerful because of my last name. But the girl I once hurt showed me that power isn't control, it's compassion. I owe my purpose to her." He and Lila often worked together, co-leading seminars and children's programs. Their bond, born from pain, forgiveness, and growth, became an example of what reconciliation truly means. They never labeled their relationship, but those who saw them together could feel the deep respect and understanding between them, something purer than friendship and deeper than romance. As for Alexander Harrington, time had softened his once sharp edges. He had stepped down as CEO, passing leadership to a younger team. He personally trained to value empathy as much as efficiency. His final address as chairman was delivered not from the top floor, but from the janitor's lounge, the place where Maria once rested during long shifts. His closing words echoed across every corner of the company. "If you forget the people who sweep your floors, you've already lost your foundation." He dedicated his remaining years to philanthropy, often visiting rural communities funded by the Lila Project. There he would quietly volunteer, painting walls, planting trees, and reading to children. He never brought cameras, never gave speeches. He simply worked, finally living the humility he had once been blind to. One sunny afternoon, many years later, an intimate gathering took place in a small park named Harmony Grove, built by the foundation. At its center stood a bronze statue, not of a billionaire or a tycoon, but of a little girl holding a broom in one hand and a flower in the other. At the statue's base was a plaque that read, "To those who clean the world," not just its floors. Maria sat on a nearby bench, a soft smile on her face. Lila stood beside her, speaking to a group of children about courage and kindness. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, holding a small bouquet of daisies, Lila's favorite. He greeted Maria with a warm hug. "Still teaching the world, I see," she chuckled. "Some lessons never end." Lila turned, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "You're late," he laughed. Some habits never change. They stood there together, not as the rich and the poor, not as the bully and the victim, but as two souls who had grown through the same story of forgiveness. Maria watched them with quiet joy. The sunlight filtered through the trees, painting their faces in gold. For her, this was what redemption looked like, peace between hearts that once broke each other. A few months later, news spread quietly. Alexander Harrington had passed away peacefully at his countryside home. When his lawyer gathered Maria, Lila, and Ethan, he handed them an envelope with Alexander's handwriting. Inside was a short, heartfelt letter. "Dear Maria, you once told me that true wealth is not measured in money, but in moments of humanity. You were right. Because of you and your daughter, my life found meaning beyond success. Please continue teaching the world what I learned too late, that the greatest power a man can have is the power to be kind." Alexander, Maria pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. Lila placed a comforting hand over hers. Ethan stood beside them silently, eyes glistening. For a moment, the room felt sacred, as if forgiveness itself had taken form, wrapping them all in peace. 10 more years later, long after Alexander's passing, the Lila Project had expanded to over 20 countries. Its motto remained etched in gold letters across every school wall it built. Kindness is the true currency of humanity. Lila, now in her 30s, stood before a crowd at a global summit on ethics and leadership. Ethan sat in the audience, listening proudly. She ended her speech with the same line her mother once told her: "Never let anyone make you feel small for doing the right thing." As applause thundered through the hall, she looked up at the sky, as if thanking those who had guided her. Back home, Maria watched the broadcast from her living room, a framed photo of the 4 of them, herself, Lila, Alexander, and Ethan, resting on her table. She smiled softly and whispered, "We did it. We really changed the world." The camera pans over the city skyline at dusk, the same city where arrogance once thrived. Now, banners of the Lila Project flutter from buildings, symbolizing compassion reborn. A janitor in a crisp new uniform walks past a group of executives. They greet him warmly, offering coffee. He smiles, surprised yet grateful, in the reflection of a glass skyscraper. The faint image of a little girl with a broom and a flower seems to shimmer, a symbol of how kindness endures through generations. And as the sun sets, a voice narrates softly, "Sometimes it takes the smallest hand to lift the heaviest heart." The janitor's daughter did not just change a billionaire, she changed the world.